This video will contain spoilers for the entire numbered Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy. If you're watching this at some point after major parts of Xenoblade 3's DLC have rolled out, it will not contain spoilers for any of that. However, what I say here might be outdated and as such no longer completely accurate if any new information on these topics is revealed during some of that content. So, Ouroboros and Lucky 7, two of the biggest deals in all of Xenoblade 3. You've got the sword that's in the title of the game, and the big new gimmick that's kind of the central aspect of this combat system. How in the world am I supposed to cover both of them in one short, by my standards at least, video? Well, here is where we'll run into one of the downsides of 3 leaving a lot of things up to the player's exploration to completely discover, because while I love overanalyzing things to figure extra secrets out, as you may have guessed, sometimes the actual answer will end up being relatively simple and boring compared to what you might have been thinking before you actually started analyzing stuff. And while your mileage may of course vary, it's veering a little close to that for me in this case. Basically, if you have no idea how either of these work, I hope to get you to the point where you can make an elevator pitch length description to someone who also doesn't know by the end of this video. And if you do have some idea, allow me to confirm your biases, assuming we have the same opinion on this topic. I'll of course give different information as needed, but most of what we need to know actually comes from 2 conversations, one with each of the 2 queens. I'm going to start with Melia's, but the one thing Nia says that I'm going to need you to keep in mind, because I'm going to keep referencing it a lot later, is the fact that she refers to both Lucky 7 / the Sword of Origin / the Sword of the End, and the Ouroboros power as, quote, gimmicks. The game itself uses this word, so I am going to use that to refer to the 2 of them in collective, as well as use it to compare and contrast with similar protagonisty powers that both Xenoblade 1 and 2's casts get access to. The important part of Bird Lady's speech is probably the exact part you're already thinking of, because I think this is now the 3rd time I have referenced it in a video. Everything that exists is reality, present lives, and future ones. Mobius aside, the wills of countless people persist inside of Origin. The Sword of the End you carry, and Ouroboros, they take their shape from those thoughts. Protect the now or carve a path to the future. The wielder decides. Believe it or not, that and a little bit of suspension of disbelief regarding the function of Origin and Origin Metal is all you really need to understand how the gimmicks are powered. They are effectively cognitive weapons, making use of minds in a Jungian collective unconscious, which is extremely on brand for the Xeno series if you've been following it longer than just Blade. When everyone's souls were collected together in Origin, there were enough people thinking so close together for any ideas that a lot of people were thinking at the same time to start actually manifesting. This of course had the disastrous consequence of Mobius coming into existence and freezing both worlds in an endless now. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single person in Origin wanted the endless now, or even that every single person contributing to Mobius's power wanted that wholeheartedly. It is, after all, possible to both want a moment to last forever and be looking forward to something that's going to happen tomorrow, and that holds true for the people in Origin as well, with some people not even wanting an endless now at all, and as such, Mobius is only able to gain power from thoughts in the first category. Any soul within Origin that's not actively contributing to Mobius's power can instead lend theirs to basically any other cause, such as escaping the Endless Now and defeating Mobius. And since both of the gimmicks were forged using one of the 2 queens' keys to Origin and involve Origin Metal, that is their outlet. All that talk about Ouroboros' power being a counter to Mobius and the opposite and its sworn enemy was not just figurative. It literally draws its power source from the opposite of Mobius's. As for Nia's conversation, she reveals 2 pretty important things. The first is that she's the one who creates the Ouroboros stones using Origin Metal and her own core crystal, and second, that both queens have some sort of key, or as she says, a heart might be more fitting, that allows them access to the functions of Origin. Based on the wording, I'm guessing it's some sort of DNA lock and not a physical thing, as in Nia's core crystal needed to be scanned by Origin, and Melia needed to undergo the same genetic scan she did in the Hyantia tomb back in Xenoblade 1, because otherwise there wouldn't have really been a good reason for Mobius to keep Melia alive and imprisoned for 1,000 years. They could have just killed her anytime they wanted, if her being alive wasn't actually part of what was needed to control it. She also goes on to say that while the Ouroboros stone creating process is done by her, Lucky 7 was actually built in part by Melia. or at least that the Sword of the End power it has is a result of Melia's control over Origin. The one thing that sets Lucky 7 apart from Ouroboros is that it does actually have function outside of its ability to draw on souls in Origin. Even without any of that power, it's still the sharpest sword in the world, because it's made out of Origin metal, which is apparently the next evolution of Mechon armor given how it's impossible to damage. As such, it's possible that Melia was not involved with the original forging of it, and the whole soul thing was something she decided upon later, and that the initial function was just to make an extremely powerful weapon, which if you think about it, almost makes sense because it was forged by Napon, who can't use blade weapons because they don't have the iris, which means they would need to create their own weapons if they wanted to. So it's possible that they made some Lucky 7s already just to have Napon to use, and that eventually got co-opted with the Sword of the End abilities once Melia saw that and decided it was a good idea before she initially got kidnapped. As an aside regarding naming, Lucky 7 is clearly just the Napon name for it, while Sword of Origin / Sword of the End are used interchangeably as its quote-unquote official names in reference to the fact that someone wielding it is capable of stopping the Endless now, and that it draws power from Origin due to the souls trapped within. It's kind of ambiguous, but the way I personally see it is Sword of the End is just the official name for it in its powered up state, while Sword of Origin is when it is actively drawing on Origin for its power, as Origin Blade is specifically the name of Noah's powered up Ouroboros talent art, which is when he basically combines the two gimmicks and draws Lucky 7 while he's transformed, pulling out a special, even more Monado looking version of the weapon. End's weapon actually changes appearance to more resemble that for only the final battle within Origin. It's pretty clear that he was powered up by Zed in some way in between the Agnes Castle fight and then, because he is defeated by the party and critically injured there, and then within Origin, Mobius sends him back at them with no extra assistance, which seems kinda pointless if he hadn't gotten made any more powerful, so it seems like in some way Zed buffed up his sword, probably more able to draw on his own power or other Mobius souls within Origin, and as such it changes appearance. Prior to that instance, it is just a darker recolor of the Lucky 7 Noah has, which more or less confirms that multiple Lucky 7s can exist at the same time. There's a seemingly arbitrary 6-person limit on how many people can be Ouroboros at any given time, so it's also my complete guess that there was a finite, relatively small, probably also 6 or 7, number of Lucky 7s made at once upon a time, and over time most of them got lost due to various things like annihilation events. N started out as a Noah, and pretty much every Noah we saw before him had the exact same blade, which has a Lucky 7 handle in it like present-day Noahs, so it seems like every version of Noah up to and including him got the same Black Lucky 7 through some means or another, so he hung on to that after becoming Mobius, and then our present-day Noah got the Silver Lucky 7 he uses in the game, which was probably the only other one remaining, and then uses that to fight against Mobius, eventually unlocking its full power, and through combination of that and interlinking with Mio, is able to use the Sword of Origin. Basically, that's my long-winded explanation for why N all of a sudden starts referring to his weapon as the Sword of Origin a lot more just in that last fight, because it seemed to have gotten powered up in an attempt to put it on par with Noah's. With that aside, there's something very big that needs to be pointed out. Lucky 7 came in part from Melia, which means it's associated with Keves in the world of Xenoblade 1. Ouroboros came in part from Nia, which means it's associated with Agnes and the world of Xenoblade 2. Let's take those two gimmicks and compare them with the gimmicks from the Xenoblade game that took place in the world they are associated with. In the strictest sense of the word, Xenoblade 1 does not have a gimmick, as the gimmicks in all of the games to follow were setting their battle systems apart from the baseline established in the first game, but if we go by gimmick as being the thing each game has unique to itself, it's clearly the Monado, a special sword in the possession of the male lead that, among other story-based powers, also gives him access to a larger set of arts than a normal character would be able to. Hey, wait, that's basically Lucky 7. In its Sword of Origin form, it even has the Ouroboros core where the Monado hole would be, and even in its smaller katana form, still has a hole right next to the hilt. Is Lucky 7 based on the Monado? Well, yes, but we can go one layer deeper. Xenoblade 2's main gimmick is obviously the Blade system, a way for two characters, one who has a core crystal and one who usually does not, to fight together and become a more dangerous combat unit than either of the two could possibly be separately. blades are also able to regenerate from any injury as long as their core is not damaged. And yeah, you get where I'm going, Ouroboros is based on the blade system. This becomes even more evident with the fact that the swimsuit reveal confirms that even Taion has a core crystal, which means basically everyone in Agnes, except all the Gormati besides Mio, maybe we never see any of them shirtless, has some sort of blade trait or core crystal on them. So any interlinking pair, which has to be one Kavesi and one Agnian, is literally a person with a core crystal and a person without a core crystal combining to become more powerful. Okay, so we have two Xenoblade 3 gimmicks. We know exactly what they're based on. How were they created? Well, given the fact that they both require origin metal in order to exist, I think it's not a big stretch to say that despite the fact they seem to have been created in Ionios for the express purpose of fighting against Mobius, that people who worked on Origin, besides just the Queens, also had a role in their creation. Future Connected showed that Shulk kept experimenting with replica Monados after the end of the main game, and with hindsight we can now see that his outfit in FC had a prototype power frame built into it. If you look at the special arts you get once Noah uses Unlimited Sword, you might recognize some of those symbols. Not only do all of the arts use kanji just like a Monado would, but Attacker version of Tachyon Slash literally uses the same kanji as Monado Purge, and Final Lucky 7 uses the same as Monado Buster, which is kind of important because Purge specifically is only used by Alvis and Shulk, which means it's very likely that Lucky 7 is basically a Shulk model replica Monado that happens to be made out of Origin metal, and if you want to extrapolate a bit further, I personally think the Ionios version of Shulk himself had a role in the creation of at least the first Lucky 7 to be made. This does not mean that the Napon story was a lie and that Shulk was actually the one to forge it. It could just mean that he drew up blueprints and handed them to the best forge masters he knew, who happened to all be Napon, or that he came up with the idea and the Napon put it into practice, or even just that some of the Napon were trained by him or one of his disciples. So he didn't have to literally have worked on it himself, it could have just been a student of a student type thing. Gonna be real, one of my major reasons for assuming Lucky 7 was designed within Ionios itself is the fact that there seems to have been some Xenoblade 2 influence in its abilities, even if it was clearly based on a thing from the Xenoblade 1 world, and that is, its version of Monado Buster isn't a single strike, it's Jin's Heavenly Disrupt, which is not only terrifying, but also something I'm not sure Shulk or anyone else from Keves would have come up with on their own without some contact with someone from that world. Speaking of that world, while we can pretty reasonably guess that Shulk had a major role in designing his half of Origin, we know as a fact that Tora had a major role in designing his. And you probably can tell where I'm going. Tora's family invented artificial blades, which means they by default understand the blade system more than basically anyone else alive at the end of Xenoblade 2, and Ouroboros is more or less another artificially created power that heavily mimics the blade system, so I can't really think of anyone else better to make it than the guy who not only helped build Origin, but also created a similar system in the past, or at least someone familiar with his school of thought. I think that's pretty cut and dry as is, but there's actually a parallel to Lucky 7's arts using Monado symbols, and that is in the names of Ouroboros arts. Obviously, throughout Xenoblade 3, there are references to every previous game in the series within the name and function of various arts from different classes, but if you look at the Ouroboros arts, while most of them are original, as far as I can tell, the only ones that reference another game all reference 2. This shows just a little bit more that they were intentionally trying to tie each of these powers to one of the worlds. Oh, also, on the way down to the amphitheater where you fight Zed, you can see that there are plenty of core crystals in Origin, which is presumably how they were storing the data of so many people, and it's also stated that you need some sort of aptitude or an Ouroboros stone will not work on you, which I think makes the connections between that and Blades even stronger. There's also the fact that interlinked Mobius seem to work on the exact same rules as Ouroboros full stop, and that when X takes N away from the battlefield after he's defeated in Chapter 6, she says something about damage to his core, and all Mobius in the normal outfits have what looks like a red core crystal there, and we can see the central computer of Origin turns that same red when it's taken control of by Mobius, but turns back into a core crystal looking blue after Zed is defeated, which means that Mobius might form their physical bodies from a core crystal, which means they are also possibly Sword of Blades? The rabbit hole goes deep, but I think we're getting away from how Ouroboros and Lucky 7 actually work. To put it as simply as I can, Lucky 7 is an evolution of the Replica Monado concept, and Ouroboros is an evolution of the Blade system, both specially designed to function better in the world of Ionios and combat the threat of Mobius. The way they do this is by drawing upon the souls of people in Origin that oppose the Mobius desire to remain in the Endless Now, which is made possible by Lucky 7 making partial use of Melia's key to Origin, and Nia creating Ouroboros stones through her own core crystal. Because Lucky 7 is forged from Origin metal, and a gear from Origin is used in every Ouroboros stone, it's also likely that both of these powers were developed by people who worked on Origin, and Lucky 7's resemblance to a Replica Monado, and Ouroboros' superficial resemblance to an artificial blade, makes it likely that the most important people in both of those projects were Shulk and Tora respectively. My favorite part about this interpretation, in addition to the part where I think it's correct, is how it lends a really heartwarming air to every single fight that's only won by the use of one or both of these gimmicks. And that is, it provides a partial answer to the question, where are all the other party members besides Melia and Nia from the first two games? Well, you could theoretically say that they had just been reincarnated and are running around as children in colonies we don't see, but I don't really believe that because every single Agnian or Kavesi soldier we meet is a brand new character to 3, and I personally think that only children who went into Origin came out as soldiers tied to the Flame Clock, which means the only real option is that they're all dead, either taken out immediately by the creation of Ionios in the first place, or as residents of the original Keves and Agnes, or the original city, who either have long since passed away due to old age, or gave their lives in the original battles against Mobius. This sounds depressing, and yes, it definitely is, but if they are currently dead, then we know where they are. They're in Origin. And we know all of these characters, because they had their own games. We know that they're the exact kind of people who, even in spirit, would be resisting Mobius with all they had, which means they're probably among the biggest contributors to the power of Lucky 7 and Ouroboros. Whenever Noah uses Unlimited Sword, I can't help but mentally overlay a partially transparent picture of Shulk screaming behind him and hear one of his iconic yells as the sword powers up. And whenever Noah is interlinked and uses his regular talent art, Mega Spinning Edge, I can't help but think of that as Rex going, "You know what, Noah? I like your attitude. Let's stop Mobius and seize the future for both our worlds together. Also, yes, you can date my daughter." And so, the next time you or somebody else asks where all of the other Xenoblade 1 and 2 party members are in 3, please, take a second to consider the possibility that the answer might be something as simple as walking alongside us towards the future every single step of the way. Thank you so much for watching as always. Do the usual liking, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoyed the video. And until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.